Uh, all right. Welcome everyone to JOVED 2020 Accreditation Task Answer and Explanation. We have four sections of accreditation tests. Section one is about true or false. Section two is all about multiple choice. Section three was a short essay, and last but not least, section four was about the debate assessment and debate exhibition. So we will divide the video into two. I will talk and explain about the first and the third section, and Kushai will continue it to talk about the debate exhibition on section four. Okay, section one, true or false. First question, an extension must include new arguments or responses that weren't discussed in the debate. The answer is false, because an extension should be everything that's new under the sun. It's not only limited in the form of argument or responses, it also could be in the form of context, new characterization, new examples, and anything that's practically new, and should not only be limited as an argument or responses. And whether or not that new contribution or new extension is valuable or not, it's something that up to the debate and up to the judges, but by default, an extension should be everything that is new. So it's not only limited in these two forms. Question number two, rebuttal may occur at any point in the speech. The answer is true, because we're not going to penalize speaker just because they put their rebuttal in the middle of their speech or at the end of their speech, because it's back to the decision of each debater, and it's back to the style of each debater. And even though they want to integrate the rebuttal inside their argument or make the rebuttal as an extension, it's something that's very acceptable. So it can happen and occur at any point in the speech. Question number three, that if the government whip feels that there's a lot of substantive material that has not been covered in the debate, to that point, it will be acceptable for them to bring new constructive extension. The answer is practically false, because that the job of the whip speaker, especially in BP, is not to bring new point, because number one, it's going to be very unfair for other teams, especially the other closing teams, because they were unable to respond it properly. Moreover, I think that the job of the web speaker is all about make a respond, but especially in BP, web speaker also obliged to provide more framing, and those are the most important thing and more important thing comparatively to bring new argument and new extensions. It is unacceptable, and we should not count that new material. But it doesn't necessarily mean that we can punish the web speaker just because they brought new extension. Just do not take that into account. Question number four, by default, principal points should be valued as equal to practical points. The answer is true. Both are important explanations. So we hope that in the tournament, there will be no adjudicator that punish or make a team lose just because they only brought principle. And we hope that the adjudicator will not directly credit practical argument higher than the principal argument. But it's all back to the dynamic of the debate, but by principle, it should value as equal. The fifth question, adjudicators are allowed to give the same score or draw to several losing teams in the round. The answer is false. The team with the lowest rank should get the lowest team score, and the team with the highest rank should also get the highest total team score. There should not be any team with the same team score, and there should not be any draw inside the BP debate or any other debate. There should be the one that is win, and there should be the one that is lose. Question number six, as an adjudicator, you may change your decision after hearing a fellow panel's verbal. The answer is true, because we're talking about BP tournament, we should always prioritize reaching a consensus. But if it's not possible, voting will be the last resort that you guys can use. But it is very much okay if you want to change your decision after you hear the fellow panel's verbals, because regardless your position, and it's very okay even if you're a chair judge inside a run and you want to flip your decision after hearing your panel, it's perfectly fine. There is no shame in it. Um, just being open-minded and open yourself to discussion, and it's okay for you to change and flip your decision. Question number 7, and adjudicators cannot take contradiction or inconsistency into account if it is not being pointed out by opposing team. The answer is false. You can take a inconsistency and contradiction even if it's not pointing out, but in the form of questioning the persuasiveness of that certain argument. But because we're also using WUDC rule and format, if there is an inconsistency or contradiction inside the team, you should only take the first claim into and consideration, and you should abandon the second claim to contradict each other. If it's being pointed out, then you can credit the team that pointed out, but it should not be used to penalize the speaker who brought the contradiction. Probably it just make the overall team persuasiveness become lesser. The question number 8, an adjudicator may penalize a speaker that consistently refused to accept any POIs during his or her entire speech in this tournament. The answer is totally false. You're not obligated to accept and over any POI. It's based on your own decision and based on your own team strategy. So it's perfectly fine for you to offer or want to accept it or not. The question number 9, if the deputy leader of opposition contradicts the leader of opposition, the opposing opposition must place forward. The answer is false. There is no automatic forward in VP debate, or there is no automatic lose in any parliamentary debate. So please note that in mind. The question number 10, it is possible to award best speaker in the room from losing team. The answer is true. It is very much possible if there is a best speaker in the round from losing team. You just need to adjust the score of the teammate. So because the team is losing team, the total team score should also be lower than the winning team. So you can adjust the score of the teammate if you want to make the certain speaker become a best speaker when that certain speaker coming from losing team. So that's the answer of our first section about true or false. Section 2, multiple choice. Question number 1, a debater may object to your decision if the answer is A. They can object to your decision if you use personal knowledge to weigh the team's argument, because you're supposed to be an average reasonable person, an average reasonable judge. So you should not use your expert knowledge and utilize your expert knowledge that exclusive only to you to judge and assess the debate. You should judge the debate based on how it goes, and as long as the fact it's not something that's totally and factually and generally known as untrue, you still need to judge that way. Number 2, an average reasonable person is, the answer is D. Someone with average reasonable knowledge of motion, but expert knowledge of competitive debating. Because you're not supposed to enter the debate with certain expectation of the motion. You're supposed to know the full rule of competitive debating, because even if you're an average reasonable person, you're expected to be a judge. So you're also expected to have a expert knowledge in competitive debating, but you should only use an average reasonable people knowledge about that certain motion. The question number 3, uh, these are the function of the positive material, except the answer is B, directly refutes an opponent's opinion or points, because that is the function of negative materials. Uh, the other answers was true. Uh, if it's coming for positive materials, but both positive and negative materials will be counted as a contribution, and both of them are equally valuable. So it just make a certain difference between positive and negative materials, or you can uh, call it as rebuttals, probably. Question number 4. In the motion, this House would ban all private healthcare. Prime Minister argued that banning all private healthcare would be beneficial as it would decrease inequality. Opposition leader conceded that inequality in healthcare is bad, but argued that this policy will only reduce inequality partially rather than entirely. Inequalities, they explain, will still exist. Both teams argue that their side of this point equally persuasively. How would you weigh in the team analysis provided by both teams? The answer is A, because opposition analysis is weaker than prop, as the consensus of inequality as a problem surrender the philosophical debate. What do we mean here is that we do the problem is that they agree that there are inequalities inside the private inside the healthcare system, but it didn't attack government team, because government team benefit still stands, because opposition agree that it will erase the inequality at some extent or partially, and it has never been government team burden to explain that it will erase the inequality as a whole. Especially government team case only talk about how they are able to decrease inequality, and they never talk about how they're able to erase inequality as a whole. So I think that the response coming from the opposition still weak, and it get into the concession that government team already tried to make, and it did not mitigate or create any attack or damage to the government team's case. Question number 5. What are the grounds for automatic loss for a team in a round? The answer is D, none of the answer above, like what I explained in the previous section. There is no automatic fort in BP debate. Question number 6. The following are rules in giving a POI or point of information, except A, the POI giver must display elaborative hand movement. This is practically a bonus question for everyone. I hope everyone answer it true. Number 7, in the motion, this House believes that Middle East should be a nuclear-free zone. Proposition argued that the Palestine possesses a large nuclear arsenal that can jeopardize regional stability. Thus, they should surrender their nuclear stocks. And opposition neither confirms or denies this fact. As an average reasonable voter, how would you assess the situation? The answer is C. You should credit the prop argument partially, because the logic of regional stability being jeopardized still able to stand, but the example of Palestine made the argument less persuasive to its error of fact. So because it is widely and generally known that Palestine do not have nuclear arsenal, so this is an irrelevant examples, but the whole structure analysis and how the situation is going to change and how it would jeopardize the stability inside the region, for example, is still an analysis that well explained and should be on it. So you should only credit the argument partially and should abandon the fact and do not use it into an account or use that fact or example as the part of decision making. The question number 8, you're judging a debate where OO and CG have arguments of the same uh, quality with respect to the depth, relevance, and analysis behind the scenes. OO has over multiple POI CG throughout both member of government and government whip speeches, but closing government chooses to exclusively take POIs from CO. Which of the following is the most true? The answer is B. This does not in any way materially affect the ranking or speaker point because CG are allowed to exclusively take POIs from CO. If they choose to do so, it's up to them, and OO ought to have preempted CG material because even though at some cases that OO cannot directly respond to CG, I think it's going to be way much better for opening team to at least preempt what is the possible claims that the closing team or their opening is going to talk about. So it's part of the team strategy whether or not they want to take POI, from which team they want to take the POI from. So it should not in any way affect the way of you to judge the debate. Okay, the question number 9. On the motion, this House will grant all sentient animals the right to life, liberty, and bodily integrity that humans enjoy. Deputy Prime Minister argues that granting animals rights will alleviate the suffering they experience. In rebuttal, DLO argues that animals do not possess the intellectual capacity to reason that humans do, and thusly the distinction is necessary. Which of the following statement is true? The answer is B. The rebuttal does not respond to argument, but should be credited for its contribution to the opening opposition case because the um, idea that TPM talked about how animals have right to alleviate the suffering that they experience, the response was insufficient because there were no explanation about the link or connection between intellectual capacity to capacity to feel a suffer or capacity to feel a pain that this animal feels. So this argument did not answer like A, why the suffering or why this alleviate of suffering is not important, or why just because they do not have intellectual capacity, why it also mean that they also cannot feel suffering. For an example, because there was no link of explanation between these two premises, we say that this response was a mismatch response to attack TPN case, but it's still able to be credited as a case for the opening opposition. Lastly, the question number 10. In the motion, this House will disallow religious leaders from publicly endorsing, rejecting, or commenting on any political party or candidate. Opening government said that the commentary from these leaders sways voters in coercive manner, and that in turn distort the political system while also limiting the democratic freedom of citizens. OO does not respond to the harm, but argue and prove that religious leaders do not have adequate power to influence voter decision making. Additionally, OO makes the argument that all individuals are entitled to their political opinion and restricting this right is unfair. This was the entire exchange that happened. What is the best answer? The answer is C. OO defeats OG because they successfully attacked the OG mechanism. Most of you answer that the elaboration, or you guys answer with E because you guys think that you guys need more information to assess this exchange. But I think that we believe that the claim that opening opposition made was enough because OG only explained that leaders able to sway people in coercive manner, but did not give a further structure analysis about what powers that leader could have, so they're able to sway the voters, even though they did not respond to the harms coming from or coming from opening government. But I think that the gravity of harms relied to the likeliness of that harm to be manifested, that also rely to the mechanizations that and characterization coming from opening government. And we think that opening opposition was perfectly able to tackle down the OO or the OG mechanism by saying that religious leaders do not have adequate power to influence voter in decision making, because there was no relation between that. But moreover, they also talk about more in principle level about, even if this person is a religious leader, people still entitled to their opinion and should not restrict their right or their political opinion include endorsing the certain party or candidate. Okay, last section, short essay. The question number one, on the motion this House would legalize all drugs, Prime Minister brought a proposal which is to allow drugs that do not create any addiction to be consumed by society should they wish so. The Deputy Prime Minister further substantiated that legalization should be allowed as these drugs do not influence an individual's mind, thus it will not endanger rationality behind the individual's consent. How do you assess the case above? The first one, we believe that the PM is curling our debate because the motion states that you should legalize all type of drugs and not just one type of drugs or several type of drugs do not create any addiction. So by the definition, the motion already explicitly said that you should legalize all drugs. So there is no necessity and urgency of opening government or PM to create the whole new interpretation when the motion already being that explicit. And second of all, DPM also fall into the same loophole as what PM and make their substantiation become irrelevant, as it still did not answer the burden of all drugs, because they also never gave us a further explanation of why they want to use a certain characterization of only use certain drugs that do not create addiction, because the answer or the substantiation of DPM was the extensions or the benefit of allowing the drugs that do not make an addiction, but because the idea of legalizing only drugs that do not create addiction or this trailing the debate, so DPM also become irrelevant in the debate, same as Prime Minister. The second question on the motion, this House believes that environmentalists should use violence to companies that cause harm to the environment. The OG argued that it is justified to give significant damage to companies because they are complicit to human suffering. As they hurt the environment, they hamper our quality of life. Therefore, they deserve a proportional punishment. Furthermore, quasi-government argued that violence is the most effective way to change a company's behavior because it gives them a huge cost to repair. And because they are profit-oriented, they will compromise to mitigate such costs. Quasi-government also argue that the most important thing when it comes to movement is how do we ensure that our actions are practically useful. How do you assess the cases from the opening government and closing government, and which team should be given a higher ranking? We agree that the CG should get a higher rank because opening government argument is only stated that companies are evil. They just gave us a principle analysis that why it's principally okay for you to punish this company, but it was not a principle that talk about why you should punish them in the extent of violence. They only talk about how we should give a proportional punishment, but they never explain that why violence is a form of proportional punishment that justify to be done under opening government. Comparatively, in closing government, I think that closing government get higher rank because they gave us a very principle that talk about how as a movement, we're also principally responsible to make change. That's why talking about practical outcome is the most important thing, because they explain the effectivity of their case and frame the debate about what is principally true and what should principally should be done as an environmentalist. And disclaimer, it is not we made CG win or won over OG just because they brought practical argument. It was not because practical argument always better than principal argument, but we think that the principal argument and framing that being delivered by closing government was more contextualized to the context of environmentalists, but they also make a further attempt and give an extra analysis to make their principle become stronger by talking about the effectiveness of their case and how they can create an actual change. The question number 3, on the motion this House will ban smoking, Prime Minister argued that smoking causes direct harm to smokers, such as short-term and long-term health issues, and the presence of harm is sufficient reason to ban things. The government must prevent this harm from reaching society and work towards the protection of individual health. Leader of opposition attempted to respond that individuals have consented to the harms, therefore it is justifiable for individuals to smoke. How do you assess the response delivered by leader of opposition? We agree that the response to some extent mitigates the harm provided by Prime Minister, but it will still insufficient to tackle down opening up Prime Minister case, because they only talk about how people are consented to the harm, but they never explain to us why that consent is ideal, what is the parameter of consent that they're talking about, and to what extent that consent apply. Because opening government or Prime Minister talk about 2 types of harms, short-term and long-term harm regarding health issues, but because LO only talk about people consented to that harms, they never explain to that what kind of harm they're consented to and why those harm that the Prime Minister is a harm that these people consented to. And moreover, that even if they're able to explain that, they never explain that why consent is more important than harm that these people will endure at the end of the day. So it's able to mitigate to some extent, but it's still insufficient to tackle down Prime Minister case. The question number 4, on the motion this House believes that USA should launch military intervention to Venezuela, the leader of OP argued that it is impossible to conduct a military intervention because the USA is lacking financial and military resources. Furthermore, the leader of opposition argued that the USA has to allocate its budget to other sectors such as education and healthcare. Hence, their funds for military purposes will not be sufficient. How do you assess the leader of opposition claims? We believe that the claim of LO is susceptible because of 2 reasons. Firstly, as an average reasonable person, it is safe to assume that USA has sufficient military and finances due them being the strongest economy in the world, unless they're able to explain and give us a structural analysis on the current portrayal on the condition of the United States. What is they going through? What is their financial condition and how it's going to look like, and why their financial is weak right now. Without the structural analysis, it's still safe to assume that USA is not that poor and still able to have that certain power or strong economy at some extent. Secondly, the comparative analysis as to education and healthcare cost or budget to military budget requires more detailed portrayal to become persuasive, because they need to explain that why military and education and healthcare should be a mutually exclusive option that USA should take. It's also become a problem because they still able to explain that why USA have that certain limitation, and we cannot buy that explanation without more structural analysis of the condition of the United States of America. Last questions in short essay section. Question number 5. On the motion, this House would legalize organ selling. Prime Minister argued that individuals have freedom of choice to do what they want, including organ selling. It is their right to make such a decision because they have the cognitive ability to make a rational choice. Deputy Prime Minister concedes that the majority of individuals might be coerced to sell their organs because they have no other option, but say it is okay because it's their only way to get a legitimate income. How do you assess the analysis delivered by Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister? Do you consider the analysis above as contradictory? First one, the claim is acceptable, as if that it is an even if analysis coming from PM principle. But sometimes, at some extent, it sounds a little bit susceptible because to be pointed out as a contradictive due to PM claim regarding that how sometimes this is an only choice that people have. This idea or premise attacks PM claim regarding people have cognitive ability and rationality to make a choice, because that it contradicts each other. Because if they talk about people do not have any much choice, meaning that people are that desperate. So why people under that condition able to create rational decision? It is potentially reducing its persuasiveness if it is able to be pointed out by the opposition and able to be capitalized as a response and attack from opposition side of the house. So that is the end of the assessment and explanations of the answers of the section 1, 2, and 3 of your accreditation test. The last part of debate assessment and exhibition will be explained by Kushai. Thank you.